In this episode, I'm going to take you through using the cut page in DaVinci Resolve for putting together edits very, very quickly. So let's get stuck in. So I'm going to be using the free version of Resolve for this session, and I'm going to start off by simply creating a new project. And let's give this project a name. As soon as you launch a new project, you go straight into the cut page, and now I can start working straight away. Now the first thing I need to do is actually import some files. I've already got some files ready for this, and they're all organized into their own separate folders. So I want to retain that folder structure as a series of bins. The cut page lets me do that very easily by clicking on this Import Media folder button. Now I can select the folder that has all of my footage and choose Open. And straight away this window appears asking me whether I want to change the project frame rate. Now I need to be very careful about this because I know that some of the footage that I've got is at different frame rates. So I'm going to choose to automatically accept the frame rate change, but then I'm just going to double check them in the project settings. So let's click Change. And now my files have been imported and I have them in a series of bins. To check the project settings, I'm going to press Shift 9 and just ensure that my timeline frame rate is at the correct frame rate, which it is. It's always worth double checking this before you start because it's much easier to put it right now than it is much later in the project. So I'll just cancel my project settings window, and now I can turn my attention to my media. Because the footage has been imported into a series of bins, I can actually use my bin list to navigate to each of the different pieces of footage. To make life easier, I can right-click on the bin list and choose to sort it by name. So now it's in alphabetical order. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a timeline, and because I'm in the cut page, the timeline will always be created at the root of the project in the master bin. So from the File menu, I'm going to select New Timeline. Let's give this timeline a name, leave everything set to the default for the project, and choose Create. As you can see, my timeline has been created in my master bin. So now typically in an edit, we would go through each of the clips that we have to edit, open them up into the viewer, look and see which clips we want to use, and then start to add them one by one to the timeline. However, the cut page has some special functionality up its sleeve called the source tape. You can access the source tape using this middle button here at the top of the viewer. Clicking the source tape does two things. Firstly, it displays all of the footage sequentially in the viewer, with each of these white lines representing each of the clips that I have within my project. I can navigate anywhere in the source tape by dragging the playhead all the way through those clips. Alternatively, I can use the up or down arrows on my keyboard to navigate between each of the clips. I'm sure you've seen the source tape before, so this is nothing new, but one of the things I often point out to people is the source tape also does something else. And that is display all of the footage within my project in a flattened view in the media pool. This means I get a view of all of the footage in one go. So I can also navigate between each of the clips by simply clicking on them here in the media pool, and that takes me directly to that clip in the source tape in the viewer. Let me just resize the interface here using the resize timeline control to give myself a little bit more room for my media pool and also my viewer. Being able to see all of the footage in this flattened view is very useful, but obviously if you've got large projects with lots of media files in them, then sometimes this can probably be a bit overwhelming. But the source tape also helps us to view footage in lots of different ways as well. For example, the order of the source tape clips are actually in the same order that the clips are displayed in the media pool. If I change the media pool order, then it will also change the clips in the source tape. So I can use the footage that's been organized into different bins in order to help me sort my source tape footage. So from the Sort menu, let's choose Bins, and now all of my footage is organized in the media pool based in the folder that it was in when I imported it, or the bin that it is in now. Again, this is useful, but I'm still viewing the whole of the project. And again, if I've got a very large project, this can be very overwhelming. So another way that you can just sort of help filter the clips actually in the source tape is by only opening the bin that you need. You can do this in a couple of ways. Firstly, if you're over a clip from a particular bin, then click the source tape button again. This will take you inside that bin temporarily. You can now navigate the footage that's in the bin, choosing the clips that you want to work with. If I press Escape, I'm now looking at the source tape for the whole project again. Another way of doing this is actually to navigate to the bin that you want to work with. So from the bin list, let's choose the bike wide bin, which gives me my starting footage. One of the things that we'll want to do is obviously be able to review the footage before we start editing with it. Now there's a handy feature in the cut page called Fast Review. This simple button will play through the clips at different speeds. Generally, each clip will be displayed for about 5 seconds. Obviously, longer clips will play faster than shorter clips. It can be a very useful way of being able to review the footage very quickly. For example, you can sit back with a cup of coffee and actually watch the footage play out in faster than real time. However, I actually like to just scrub through the footage using the source tape and just reviewing the clips manually by dragging the playhead. Nevertheless, let's start at the beginning here and let's start to edit some footage together. And we'll start with this first clip here of the rider approaching the camera. So I want to add this to my timeline, which I can do by clicking the Append button. There's no need to select the clip, this will simply append the clip directly into the timeline automatically. Notice that the source tape is still active, and this is something that's very different than the edit page, which always switches to the timeline by default. So this means I can just simply play through to the next clip and see if this is a clip that I want to use. Which I think I do. So again, I can click the Append button. Of course, if you're using a feature more than once like this, it's very handy to actually learn the keyboard shortcut for it. And in this case, the keyboard shortcut for Append is Shift F12. So I want to take this next clip here, so I can just simply place the playhead over the clip and press Shift F12 on my keyboard. Of course, sometimes I don't want to use the entire clip, so it's useful to be able to know that you can also set in and out points on the clip so that you can just bring in the portion that you actually want to use. For example, the next clip here in my source tape is actually quite a long clip in comparison that actually has 2 versions of him cycling over this very rustic bridge. I want to take the second of those 2 tapes, starting about here. So rather than taking the whole clip, I can actually just set an in point by pressing I. If I now play through the clip, I can locate the end of the shot that I want to use and press O to set an out point. Let's press Shift F12 again to edit that clip into the timeline. I can also set in and out points that actually bridge multiple clips in the source tape, so I can bring in more than one clip at a time if I need to. Let me jump to the next clip in the source tape and I'll play through. This is another clip where he's cycling over the bridge that I actually want to use. So just as he plays through here, I'll just stop that and I will use my shuttle control here just to shuttle back through the shot to somewhere about there just before the wheel comes into shot. And I'll press I to add an in point, to play forwards. Let him cycle off a little bit. And I'll stop the playhead there and I'll press O to add an out point. Again, Shift F12 to add the clip into the timeline. Of course, you can always drag and drop clips from the source tape as well, but if you are doing this, then make sure you do add the in and the out points, otherwise it'll take the whole source tape into your timeline. So the last clip that I want to use here is this clip, as he cycles into shot and starts to disappear into the distance there. So I'm going to mark this whole clip by pressing X. And now I can drag the clip where I want it in the timeline. So I will pick him up here and drag him somewhere into the timeline. Excellent. So I've started my edit, but obviously I need to actually do a lot more work in terms of refining the edit, changing the clip position, and more importantly, also being able to trim those shots down a little bit because they're actually quite long still for this particular project. So the first thing I want to do is actually reposition the clips in the timeline. I'll start by using this clip that we actually just added to the timeline, and I want to use this as my opening shot. So I'm just going to simply click on him and drag him in the upper full timeline to the very beginning here and let go, and you'll see that that's just simply picked him up and moved him back into position in the timeline. If I now just play through this clip, I probably at this point want him to start just before he enters shot here. So at that point, I'm going to actually split the clip. And I can do that by clicking this button here that looks like a pair of scissors. As you can see, this splits the clip in two, and the clip that's highlighted is the bit that I don't want. So I'm just going to press the backspace key in order to remove that from my timeline. I'm going to play forwards and stop the clip about there when he's far enough away that it doesn't really make much difference. And this time I'm going to right click on the top of the playhead and again choose the split clip option. I'll select the part of the clip that I don't want and again remove it from the timeline. Moving through this clip here, there's probably a good portion of this clip that I don't want. Probably want it to start here as he starts to come out of the light. So I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut to split the clip, which is Command or Control-B. Again, select the portion of the clip that I don't want and remove it from the timeline. Play the clip towards the end, and again do the same thing. Because I'm removing a portion of the clip from both the beginning and end, there's a really handy shortcut called Trim Start and Trim End that I can use to just get the footage down to a much more manageable portion. To do that, I'll play through this clip and find the point where I want the shot to start. Again, using the jog control to refine the position. I'll now use the keyboard shortcut Shift and then the left square bracket in order to be able to trim the start of this clip to the playhead position. And I can do the same thing with the end of the shot. If I play through the clip and I want to trim the end, I can use Shift right square bracket to trim the end of the clip. This is incredibly handy. If you want to play through the timeline, you can very quickly top and tail each of the shots. Again, I'll do the same thing here with this shot. Let's just nudge back a few frames. And again, Shift left square bracket. Followed by Shift right square bracket. Shift left square bracket. Ooh, Shift right square bracket. Let's see if we can get this edit to work. Shift left square bracket. And I'm going to use the / key to play around my current edit point. And it seems the editing gods are smiling on me because that worked out quite well. I'm going to switch back to the source tape, but this time I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Q. And I'm going to remove the in and the out points I've already got here by pressing Option X. So let's scrub through, let's find some shots. I think this one's quite a good shot where he actually does a little bunny hop here. That's quite nice. So Shift F12 to append that into the timeline. Let's see, this one's another good shot here. So again, Shift F12 to append that. So here we've got a little sort of jump here from a distance. Shift F12 to append it into the timeline. And then this shot we want, followed by, this shot. So I'm now going to switch to the timeline and I'm just going to refine the timing of these clips a little bit, just to get them down to a bit more of a more interesting duration. So I'll press Q to switch to the timeline and start refining the durations. So I'll have come in and here, about there. Probably probably out about there. Where are you? Where are you? There you are. So from about here, I think, to, obviously we want the jump. Again, once more. Take it from about there. And 2 more clips. Okay. So now I've gone through and I've trimmed the clips. I then want to go back through and I'll just change the order slightly. So I know that I probably want to finish on this shot, so I'm going to drag that back to the end of the timeline. These 2 clips I could probably do with coming to those maybe a little earlier. Not quite there. Let's move them to the next edit point along. Yeah, that works a bit better. So let's have a look at how our timeline is looking at the moment. Let's go back to the beginning and let's play through. Don't forget that this is a rough cut at the moment, so obviously it's a little dry, there's not much atmosphere, we need to add a little bit of music. Obviously some of the edits are also a little bit loose, but it does give me a sense as to whether the shots are working, whether the durations of the shots seem right, and how the edit is holding together. Well, it's looking okay, but there's obviously a couple of places where I could do a bit of a nip and a tuck. And one of the places I've noticed is probably this edit here, where we jump between the 2 clips. And one of the great things about the cut page is I don't need to keep swapping between different timeline modes. I can actually just trim the clips directly on the timeline, very, very simply. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to select the outgoing portion of that first clip and I'm just going to trim it back using the 2-up display in the viewer as a guide, just to sort of align the movement of the bike wheel from one shot to the next. Let's press the / key to preview the edit. And that works great. Of course, what I didn't leave in this case was I didn't leave a gap in the timeline, because the timeline automatically ripples as I trim the clips. So this is a really useful feature in the cut page. You don't have to think about going into the specific trim edit mode in order to be able to achieve that functionality. So probably at this point here, I'm probably going to want to add a few more clips. Now, normally in the edit page, if I'm inserting clips, I'll need to make sure that the playhead is in the right position. But in the cut page, I don't need to worry about it, because I have this little smart indicator here showing me my nearest edit point. And this will actually also be the point at which my clips will be inserted using the smart insert function. So I'm going to head over to the source tape, and this time I'm going to switch bins to the bike details bin. This has shots with close-ups of different parts of the bike, but generally the duration of each of these shots is much longer than the shots I've been previously working with. So when you're dealing with shots like this, sometimes it's actually nice to just be able to open a single clip into the viewer so that you can concentrate on that and see the full length of the clip in the viewer. I'm going to start with this shot here at the beginning, and I'm going to open this shot into the source clip viewer by using this button next to the source tape button. This opens the clip directly into the viewer, so now I've only got the one clip open. I can actually just concentrate on it. So let's add an in point about here and an out point about here. This gives me a shot duration a little under 3 seconds, so it'll probably need refining, but it's a good place to start. So to insert this clip into the timeline, I just need to use my smart insert button. And now I'll switch back to the source tape, where I can navigate to the next shot that I'm interested in, which is this one. To open a clip directly into the source clip viewer, you can press Shift-Q. This switches from source tape to source clip. I'll just use a portion of this shot, quite early on. This time I'll use the keyboard shortcut for Smart Insert, which is F9. Press Shift-Q, switches me back to the source tape. Let's have a look and see what we've got. I think this shot will be next, so again, Shift-Q to enter source clip. A little bit more control over it, probably from about here, I would have thought. Again, just under 4 seconds, that's a reasonable duration. Insert with F9. Shift-Q to re-enter the source tape. Here. So Shift-Q for source tape, somewhere around here. It's a bit wobbly around there, so that's good. Somewhere like there, and again, insert that clip into the timeline. Of course, you don't have to just simply insert the clip using a shortcut. You can actually just drag and drop a clip directly into the timeline. So in the source tape, I'm now going to switch the bin to my rider close-ups bin. Let's have a look at some of the footage here that we've got of the close-up of the rider. Oh, this is quite good here, where we've got a nice full in-your-face shot. So let's open that into source clip. That's quite a good reaction there. Sort of frowning at something. But, oh, what's happening here? Yeah, but that looks okay. So again, I'll add a few seconds of that. And I will pick that up and I will drag and drop that into the timeline where I want it. So once again, the source tape is showing me all of the footage. I'm navigating between each of the clips within the project, and then I'm able to append them or insert them or drop them wherever I want into the timeline. Now what I want to do is give it a little bit more atmosphere, so I'm going to add some music. If I now select the source tape again, and this time I'm going to switch to my footage bin, and here you can see I've actually got a piece of music here. Now, strangely enough, audio clips on their own don't appear as part of the source tape in the viewer. But because I'm seeing a flattened view of the media pool, it's really easy to be able to locate them and find them, and then open them into the source clip viewer. So I'm going to select my music clip, press Shift-Q to open the source clip viewer. Now I'm not going to bother setting an in point because the music pretty much starts at the beginning, but I don't need to use the full 2.5 minutes of this clip. So I'm just going to add an out point somewhere at random about halfway through the clip, pick the clip up and then drag it directly into my timeline. It's probably a bit too long, so let's just move the playhead here, press Command-B to split the clip and remove the portion that we don't want. Now, one of the first things that you're going to want to do when you add an audio clip to your edit is actually lower the volume of that clip so it's more in keeping with the rest of your edit. And unlike the edit page where we actually have the audio overlays in the clip, we don't have those here in the cut page, but we do have some other controls. So I'm going to move the playhead back to the beginning and select the audio clip. Now I'm going to open up my tools. As you can see, this takes me directly to the audio level because this is an audio clip. If I now adjust the level, you can see that the volume is actually changing in the clip because the waveform is adjusting. Now I don't have any set amount of changes that I'm making here. I can open the inspector and make them in the audio tab. However, I actually like to use this control in a much more dynamic way by simply playing the audio and setting the level as I'm playing. So let me hit play. And I just want the audio to be set roughly around about that -12 dB mark. Whilst I'm here, there's a couple of audio clips that are quite loud, so I'll select each of those in turn and just lower them down slightly just to attenuate the audio a little. If you actually want to see a little bit more detail about the audio that you're adjusting, you can actually use the Enlarge Track button. This opens the clip out so that you can see the waveform in a little bit more detail. Now I've got some music in the timeline, it's time to go back through that footage and see how it's working with the music. This time with the music playing, the whole edit seems to come alive and we can get a real sense as to how the shots are actually working. It also gives me an opportunity to see how the shots will be working with the music, and of course I probably want to change some of these edits based on the beats of the music. As you can see, each of the changes that I'm making are still rippling the timeline, but it's only affecting the clips after the current selected edit point. This means that my music remains unaffected. Okay, so let's have a little bit of fun with this timeline now, and let's look at a couple of little bit of effects work that we can do. And I'm going to start with a simple picture-in-picture. I'm going to start with this clip here, which I'm actually just going to place alongside this clip. So I'm going to select the clip here in the timeline and drag him up to the upper level above this clip here. And one of the first things that you'll notice when I do this is how the timeline automatically adjusts in order to be able to display all of those tracks together in the lower timeline. If I need any more room, then I can always adjust the timeline size using the Resize Timeline button. Let's just trim this clip out here, down at the bottom, as you can see. And this also leaves a gap here, now that I've got the music added to the timeline. So I'm going to select the gap and just delete that in order to ripple the timeline back. Okay, so that's got the two clips stacked on top of each other. So now I need to reduce the size of those clips and just reposition them on screen. I'm going to use the tools for this. So let's select the first clip here, open up the tools, and let's select the transform controls. And I'm going to adjust this to about 0.5 or half of its original size in the viewer. Select the lower clip and do the same again. And now I'm going to use this horizontal position in order to be able to reposition those shots side by side. Of course, I could also use the on-screen controls to actually click the clips in the viewer and move them exactly where I want them to be. I think I actually want to adjust the edit slightly so that we come back to this full screen shot once we actually hit that beat of the music. So I'm actually just going to trim the out point of this shot here. Just trim that back to about there. Might be a bit too much. Let's just see how that works. Yeah, that works okay, I think. Okay, so in this last shot, let's find an appropriate point where the guy can actually be frozen at the height of his jump. At this beat here. So I'll just move the shot slightly on the timeline so that it lines up under my playhead. Just trim the clip back to fill that gap, and then open the inspector. In the video controls, let's open up the speed change and click the freeze frame button. This will create a freeze frame at this frame. Let's just trim that freeze frame out slightly. And again, in the video inspector, let's add a slight dynamic zoom with an ease out. So in the tools, we'll enable the dynamic zoom on screen controls and just adjust that slightly so that it doesn't zoom in quite so much. Now all we need to do is add a fade out to this clip. Again, using the smart indicator as a guide, pointing at the end of the edit point there, I can just quickly click on this dissolve button. And I want to just trim this audio back. Select the edit point and add an audio fade by pressing Command or Control T. Let's make that a little bit longer. And in the inspector, I can actually change the fade out to a -3 dB. So now we've added some effects, let's start to think about some titles. I'm going to add a title right at the very beginning. Let's open up the titles browser so that we can see these presets. And you can actually live preview these by just simply moving your mouse over them, and they will actually display in the viewer. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a big user of title templates like this. I prefer to create my titles myself. However, they can be very useful to help get you started and see what's possible to create. So I'm just going to select the Text Plus tool and then click on the Place on Top command. If I select the title and reopen the inspector, I can now customize the title. Let's make this title slightly larger. Let's squeeze the lines together a little bit more. Obviously, I want to be able to change the title's color and probably add a drop shadow. Now, in the Text Plus, the best place I've found to do this is in the Shading tab. So let's click Shading, and under the first element, we can actually change the color of our text. So let's make it a slightly warm, sort of yellowy color. If we select element 3, which by default is a simple black shadow, and enable that, that gives us our drop shadow. Let's just adjust the position of that shadow slightly, make it a bit tighter, and also probably reduce the softness down a little bit. That's looking good. Under the Layout tab, we can add a little bit of a rotation to the Z axis, just to align it with the hills that we have in the background of that clip. Obviously, I could probably create a whole video series about formatting and editing text in Resolve, but just for this, I think I'll just use simple transition and a simple effect just to animate the text slightly. So let's close the inspector and head over to our transitions browser where I want to use the push transition. So let's add that to the beginning and also to the end of our titles. Let's select the transition and open the inspector. Instead of pushing from the left, I'm going to choose to push up for both of those transitions. And for an added bit of fun, let's add a little bit of camera shake. Close the inspector again, head over to the effects browser, and let's find the camera shake that's in the transform category. Drag that to my title. It's probably a little extreme, I admit. Back in the inspector, in the effects tab, I'm just going to reduce the motion scale and the speed scale to something a little more sensible. And now I'm just going to trim that title to the correct duration. Now, as I'm doing this, you'll notice that in the top timeline, it's only affecting the title itself. It's not affecting any of the other clips. And this is important. In the cut page, only that first track will ripple, and it will continue to ripple if I make any further adjustments to it. But any subsequent tracks that I add, such as anything with titles on, music or sound effects, won't then ripple the rest of the timeline. This means that my two-layered effect here is perfectly safe from any of the changes I'm making to the title. I'm going to select the title, copy it, and just come to the end of my timeline here. About there, I think. I'm going to paste another version of my title in there. Again, let's just trim that to the correct length. Let's change my title. Let's reduce the size down a little bit. And in the layout, we'll just take a bit of that rotation off and change the Y control to bring the title down a little bit. Let's just trim that back out slightly. And the final thing to do, of course, is to watch the whole thing through from beginning to end and full screen. So heading back to the beginning of my timeline, I'm going to click the full screen button and hit play. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget there are tons more tutorials like this that I've created for Resolve. And until next time, take care.